When Carol told me to leave my own house, I didn't even blink. I stood there, coffee in hand, still in my t-shirt and joggers, staring at her like she just asked me to hand over my skin. Her voice was sharp, confident in that entitled way she always carried herself, like the world owed her something. "Brandon," she said, "it's time for you to move out. Eric needs his house now. He's ready to start a family, and this was always meant to be his." She said like I was a tenant, like I was some long-term guest whose time had finally run out. I looked at her, then glanced over at Melissa, who was standing just behind her mother, arms folded, silent. Not shocked, not confused, just waiting, like she expected me to fight it, or cry, or beg. But I didn't do any of that. I smiled. I smiled so wide it felt unnatural. I walked over to the counter, set my mug down, and pulled out my phone. I opened the moving company's app I'd used before when I helped her cousin move last year. Quick, efficient. I booked the first available slot. I even paid extra for express packing. Carol looked confused. Melissa too. They hadn't expected me to say yes. Not like that. Not without a word of protest. "You're just going to leave?" Carol asked, brows scrunched, voice shaky for the first time. I shrugged. "Sure," I said. "You said Eric needed his house back. I wouldn't want to stand in his way." What they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the deed of this house had my name on it. Mine alone. I had been the one paying that $7,200 mortgage every month for 3 years straight. When I married Melissa, she moved in here with me. Her mother, Carol, started visiting so often it felt like she lived here too. Then Eric started sleeping over. Then the questions began. Why don't you get a bigger place? Wouldn't this be perfect for Eric when he settles down? At first, I brushed it off. Then I tolerated it. Then I resented it. They talked like this house belonged to them, like I was holding something that should have been passed down. But I let it slide because Melissa was my wife, and Carol was her mother, and families are messy. Now they were handing me my walking papers in the living room I paid for, under the roof I sweated for. I watched Carol's face shift as the realization sank in. Too late. Maybe it was the confidence in my voice, or how calm I was. But she looked unsure now. "Brandon, wait," she started. But I was already heading upstairs. I wasn't grabbing my things. I was taking stock, making mental notes of everything I was leaving behind. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. I didn't need to drag this mess with me. Back downstairs, Melissa followed me into the hall. "You're really doing this?" she asked. I looked at her. This woman I'd married. The one who'd stood by and said nothing while her mother demanded I leave. "You let her talk to me like that in my own house," I said. "You think I'm going to argue with either of you?" "No. I'm going to let you have exactly what you asked for." She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Maybe she thought she had more time. Maybe she thought I'd blow up, or beg, or plead for her to stand up to her mother. But I was done. The moving truck arrived 2 hours later. The guys loaded my essentials, my clothes, my guitars, my work equipment. I gave them clear instructions on what to take. The rest, I left it. Let them fight over the leftovers. As I walked out the front door, I paused and looked back. Carol was sitting on the couch, looking smaller now, like the walls had suddenly closed in. Melissa was in the kitchen, arms crossed, staring at the floor. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. I didn't leave because I was kicked out. I left because they revealed exactly what they thought of me. And that was all I needed to know. Eric was always the king in their little kingdom. The golden boy who could do no wrong. Even when he was neck deep in his third failed marriage, child support piling up, and real estate licenses barely hanging by a thread. To Carol, he was still the miracle child, the sun in their orbit. When he walked into a room, everyone adjusted themselves, like he brought gravity with him. I saw the first time I met him. He was charming, sure, slick, polished in that used car salesman kind of way. You could smell the cologne and the ego before he even opened his mouth. But it was the way Carol looked at him, like he was sent straight from heaven, that really told me everything I needed to know. Melissa just sat there beside me, smiling politely, quietly enduring it like she had her whole life. I didn't get it at first. The way Carol talked about him, you'd think he was a Fortune 500 CEO, not a guy barely holding down a broker's license and juggling debt collectors. But it didn't matter. In her mind, Eric was success personified. When I bought the house in Westfield Hills, Carol practically fainted from joy because she assumed he had bought it. Not me. She walked around the open floor plan with stars in her eyes, saying things like Eric finally found his footing, and it's just perfect for raising a family. I hadn't even unpacked the kitchen yet, and she was already claiming it like some royal inheritance. The thing is, Melissa never corrected her. She didn't say a word when Carol referred to it as Eric's new house at dinner. Not when she told the neighbors that my son is settling down here. Not even when she called me lucky to have married into such a successful family. Melissa would give me this look, tight-lipped, apologetic but silent. She told me once, in a low voice while we were cleaning up after brunch, she wouldn't understand. It's easier to let her believe what she wants. That's how the lies festered. That's how we got here. Carol had built a narrative in her head, and no one was brave enough to tear it down. Eric owned the house. Melissa was just staying in it until he was ready. I was barely a footnote. And when Carol told me to leave, it wasn't out of malice. It was out of delusion. She believed I didn't belong because, in her story, I never had. Melissa's silence cut deeper than Carol's ignorance. She had every chance to speak up. Every moment, every room, every sentence dripping with fantasy, and she chose to stay quiet. I asked her once, long before the move-out incident, why she never told her mother the truth. Her answer was simple. She wouldn't believe me. That told me everything. Carol didn't just idolize Eric. She lived in a world crafted around him. And Melissa had spent her entire life shrinking to fit inside it. Tyler, the youngest, floated through the family like a forgotten shadow. Crypto this, startup that, always pitching some half-baked idea like he was one lucky break away from a TED Talk. No one took him seriously. Not even Carol. He was tolerated. Barely. But Eric? Eric could have burned the house down, and Carol would have blamed faulty wiring. When I bought the Westfield Hills house, I did it because I wanted to build a life with Melissa. I wanted her to feel secure, rooted, loved. I didn't care that she made less than me, or that I was covering most of the expenses. That's what you do in a marriage, right? You carry the weight when you can. But what I didn't expect was to become invisible in the very home I paid for. I didn't expect to sit through dinner after dinner listening to Carol gush about Eric's baby shower plans while ignoring the mortgage receipts with my name on them. I started noticing little things. Carol rearranging furniture when she visited, saying things like, Eric will want the crib in this room. Melissa letting her, never pushing back, like she was already bracing for a future that didn't include me. Tyler once asked me, jokingly, if I felt weird crashing in Eric's house. I laughed, but it stuck with me. That's what they thought. That's what they all believed. 3 years of silent tolerance. 3 years of letting them act like I was some placeholder. The ATM husband. A stepping stone. And all because the golden child was finally ready to settle down. Carol built a fantasy, and Melissa let her live in it. I was just a fool who paid for the set. The lie started the week after our wedding, right when the ink was barely dry on the paperwork, and we were still unpacking boxes. I remember sitting at the kitchen table of the new house, surrounded by unopened dishes and that faint smell of fresh paint, when Melissa told me we needed to talk. She looked nervous in a way I hadn't seen before, twisting her fingers together, avoiding eye contact. Then she said it, almost casually, like it was no big deal. She asked me if I could let her family believe that Eric had bought the house and was letting us live there. At first, I thought she was joking. I actually laughed. But she didn't. She explained it slowly, carefully, like she was walking through a minefield. Her family, especially her mother, wouldn't handle the idea of her marrying a man who was more successful than her brother. It would embarrass Eric. It would upset Carol. It would cause tension that just wasn't worth it. She said it would be easier if they thought I was just staying there, benefiting from Eric's generosity. Temporary. Replaceable. I should have said no right then. I know that now. But I loved her, and love makes you stupid in very specific ways. I told myself it was harmless. Just a story. Just a way to keep the peace. So I agreed. I signed a mortgage, wired the down payment, and let someone else take the credit. I watched Carol beam with pride at her son's achievement, while I stood there holding the wine glasses like a guest in my own life. From that moment on, I became the guy who needed guidance. The guy who should be grateful. Carol would give me little lectures about responsibility, about how lucky I was that Eric was helping us out. She'd suggest I pitch in more, even though I was paying every single bill tied to that house. Property tax, utilities, insurance, everything. Eric would smirk and give me advice about money, about career moves, about how hard it was to provide for a family, all while I nodded along and swallowed my pride. Melissa saw it all. She heard every comment. She watched me take it. Whenever I tried to bring it up, she'd brush it off and tell me it was temporary, that it didn't mean anything, that I was being too sensitive. She always promised we'd tell them eventually, just not now. Not when things were stressful. Not when Eric was going through something. Not when her mom was in one of her moods. Eventually turned into never. The worst part wasn't the insults or the assumptions. It was the way I started to disappear. I stopped correcting people. Stopped defending myself. I let them believe I was less than I was because it kept things smooth at home. I told myself that being a good husband meant absorbing the discomfort so Melissa wouldn't have to. I didn't realize how much of myself I was giving up in the process. When Carol walked into the house that morning and told me to pack my bags, she wasn't being cruel in her mind. She was just enforcing the rules of the lie we'd all been living in. In her version of reality, I had overstayed my welcome. Eric needed his house back. I was just the guy who'd been allowed to stay for a while. That was the moment something in me finally snapped into place. Not in anger, not in rage, but in clarity. I saw the lie for what it was, and what it had turned me into. I realized I'd spent years making myself smaller, so other people could feel bigger. Standing there, being told to leave the house I paid for, I understood that the lie had outlived whatever purpose it once served. And I was done carrying it. Carol didn't just tell me to leave. She gave me a sermon. She stood in the living room, arms folded across her chest like a judge handing down a sentence. Her voice laced with that sugary superiority she'd perfected over the years. She talked slowly, like she thought I might be too dense to keep up. Eric and his wife really need the house now, Brandon, she said, as if I were squatting in some forgotten guest room instead of the person who had signed every check that kept this place running. They're having a baby, after all. It's only fair. You've had your time here. I stayed quiet, sipping my coffee while she paced around my living room like she owned the place. She glanced at the furniture, gesturing casually as if already mentally redecorating. I think it's reasonable to expect you to be out in 30 days, she continued. There are some very affordable apartments closer downtown. I looked into a few. They should be manageable for a consultant like you. A consultant like me. She said it like it was a polite way of calling me unemployed. Like I was just floating through life on someone else's dime. I wanted to laugh, really laugh, but I didn't. I just nodded and watched her let herself out, perfectly satisfied with the idea that she'd handled a delicate family situation with grace and authority. As soon as the door shut behind her, I walked straight to the office. No anger, no pacing, just calm. I opened the filing cabinet and pulled out the thick folder I'd been stuffing for the past 3 years. Mortgage documents, monthly payment confirmations, property tax receipts, utility bills, all with my name on them. Every cent accounted for. 36 statements, each showing $7,200 withdrawn from my account like clockwork. Every month, without fail. Not one missed payment. Not one check from Eric. Not one line of text with his name on it. Just me. I sat down at the dining table and spread the documents out in perfect rows, like a museum exhibit of quiet responsibility. I didn't need to prove anything to Carol, or Eric, or anyone else, but I needed to see it for myself. I needed the physical weight of it to remind me that I hadn't imagined the years of work, the sacrifices, the long nights, and endless calls to vendors, inspectors, contractors. I'd built this life. I'd paid for every square foot of it. And for 3 years, I let someone else live in the illusion that it was theirs. Melissa came back from yoga about an hour later, her gym bag slung over one shoulder, hair tied up, still glowing from the class. She saw the folder and the rows of documents the moment she stepped inside. Her face didn't fall right away. It was slow, like a realization creeping up her spine, one she'd been hoping to avoid forever. She set the bag down quietly. "What's all this?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She stared at the papers, then looked at me. Her voice was softer now. "Did she come by?" I nodded. "Gave me 30 days. Suggested apartments." She closed her eyes and let out a breath like the weight of the world was pressing on her chest. And still, she said nothing. Not at first. Just stood there, absorbing the mess we'd created. Finally, I asked her the one thing that had been burning in my throat for months. "What?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked down, picked at her nails, then finally met my eyes. Because it was easier. Because I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't think it would get this far. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just stared. She admitted it all. That she'd let her mother believe Eric bought the house. That she never corrected the lie, because confronting it would have meant confronting her entire childhood. The golden child, the delusional favoritism, the hierarchy that kept her silent for decades. She said she never meant for it to hurt me. She thought the lie would fade, that maybe over time it wouldn't matter anymore. But it did matter. Every comment, every look, every time her family treated me like a burden instead of the provider I was. It added up, and now the lie had grown so big, it swallowed the truth completely. She didn't want to rock the boat. So instead, she let me drown under it. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The air in the house felt thinner, quieter, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do. There was no hesitation this time. No dragging my feet or waiting for someone else to steer. I sat at my desk, called my lawyer, and laid it all out. I wanted the house listed immediately. No delays. No drawn-out discussions. Just a clean break. Then I called a high-end moving company that specialized in short notice, discreet transitions. I didn't want drama. I just wanted to be gone. Melissa was at her parents' house for their usual Sunday dinner. It was almost poetic in its timing. I knew Carol would be gushing over Eric's nursery plans, and Melissa would be nodding along, pretending not to hear the undertones. While they were laughing over dessert, I was walking from room to room, packing only what was mine. My guitars, my books, my suits, the tools I brought into the marriage. The rest could stay. I didn't want furniture we picked out together or gifts with names etched in the wood. I didn't want reminders. I worked efficiently, focused. I didn't let myself sit down or pause too long on any one item. I kept it simple, one room at a time. No emotions, just logistics. By the time the sun dipped below the trees in the backyard, the truck was loaded and gone. The house looked the way it did when we first moved in, clean, echoing, slightly too big for one voice. I walked into my office and set the folder down on the desk. It was heavy, not just in weight, but in meaning. Inside it were 3 years of receipts, mortgage statements, tax payments, utility bills, all with my name, my account, my responsibility. The deed sat right on top, with a paperclip holding a brief note I'd written in calm, even handwriting. Your mom told me to leave Eric's house. So I did. The house goes on the market tomorrow. We'll talk. No anger. No sarcasm. Just facts. I wasn't interested in arguments or tears or long explanations. I'd done enough explaining. By the time Melissa would get home, I'd be long gone. My new place was already waiting. A high-rise apartment downtown with panoramic windows and hardwood floors that gleamed under the city lights. Rent was steep, $8,000 a month, but I didn't blink. After years of paying for a house that everyone else claimed ownership of, I was ready to live somewhere that was mine in every way that mattered. No illusions. No inherited narratives. Just a clean skyline and silence that belonged to me. I walked into the new apartment just as the sun was setting, casting orange across the towers outside. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the cars below like ants, everything moving but distant. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was performing. I didn't feel like I was shrinking myself to make someone else comfortable. I felt free. The space was empty, but it didn't feel hollow. It felt clean, real. Every square inch had been claimed by me, not borrowed or presented as a favor. I unpacked slowly that night. One suitcase, one guitar case, one folder with signed paperwork that would change everything. I didn't need anything else. I already had what I came for, my life back. The chaos started within hours of Melissa finding the folder. Missed calls, voicemails, texts, one after another, lighting up my phone like a fire alarm. At first it was just her, confused, panicked, demanding to know what I was doing, telling me this was crazy, that we needed to talk like adults. Then Carol chimed in, sending me a message so thick with indignation it was almost funny. She actually accused me of stealing Eric's home. That's how warped things had gotten. In her mind, I wasn't reclaiming what was mine. I was committing some kind of betrayal. Then Eric reached out. Of course he did. Threatening legal action, bluffing like he had any claim to the house. He didn't even know the parcel number. But there he was, sending messages about property rights and contracts like he hadn't been free riding on my silence for 3 years. Melissa's dad got involved too. The only one who'd ever seemed halfway reasonable. He tried to mediate, called it a misunderstanding, said we're all family here, and surely we can work this out. I didn't respond to any of them. There was nothing left to explain. The paperwork said it all. The years of being disrespected said more. And the fact that none of them had lifted a finger to stop this from spiraling until it blew up in their faces, that said everything. Days passed. The messages slowed, but didn't stop. Then, one night, Melissa showed up at my apartment. I should have ignored the buzzer. I knew what this would be. But I opened the door anyway. She stood there in the hallway, puffy-eyed, dressed in the same oversized hoodie she used to wear on lazy Sundays, the one that made her look small and soft. Her hand was shaking. She didn't say anything at first, just walked in like she didn't know where else to go. She broke down in the kitchen. Tears. Real ones. Not the performative kind. She wasn't yelling or defending herself. She was unraveling. And for the first time, she told me everything. Eric had never bought anything. That $35,000 Carol gave him, gone. Spent. She didn't know on what exactly. Maybe debts, maybe his wedding, maybe the usual black hole his money always disappeared into. But he hadn't used a cent of it toward a house. Instead, he let Carol believe he had. And Melissa? She let him use my house to keep the lie going. She said she didn't mean to hurt me. She said it started as a way to keep the peace, to avoid the drama she grew up with. One small lie that got out of hand. She said she never expected her mom to take it this far. She begged me to believe she never saw this ending the way it did. I listened, quietly, let her get it all out. Then I told her, just as quietly, that I was done being a prop in her family's fantasy. I had played the role they needed me to play, the quiet placeholder husband, the background character in Eric's heroic narrative. I paid for everything while being treated like a guest. I endured the jabs, the dismissals, the sheer audacity of being told I was lucky to live in a house I bought. And the one person who should have had my back, the one person who could have set the record straight from the beginning, chose to protect the illusion instead. It wasn't just about the house. It was about the years I spent making myself small so her brother could feel big. About being used to patch holes in a broken family dynamic that I never created. About giving everything and being thanked with silence. She cried harder, tried to reach for my hand. I stepped back. Because there's no apology that undoes a foundation built on lies. No amount of tears that rewrites the truth I had to live with. And no version of love that should ever ask someone to disappear for the sake of someone else's ego. It didn't happen right away, but eventually Melissa told them. All of it. No half-truths. No softened edges. Just the blunt reality. She sat her family down and finally pulled back the curtain on the 3-year performance they'd been so comfortable living in. She told them I was the owner of the house. That Eric never paid a dime toward it. That the so-called down payment Carol had gifted him had vanished into whatever personal pit Eric had dug for himself. That for 3 years, they had treated me like a leech in the very home I was building from the ground up, month after month. Carol didn't take it well. Of course she didn't. Her whole sense of control, of pride, a belief in the infallibility of her golden child, shattered in real time. She was humiliated. Her word, not mine. She apparently sat there in stunned silence, her face frozen while Melissa laid everything out. Not angry, just humiliated. That tracks. For someone like Carol, reputation always mattered more than reflection. Being wrong was worse than being cruel. Eric, predictably, was furious. Not because of what he'd done, but because the lie had unraveled. He called Melissa ungrateful, said she'd destroyed family unity, as if family unity was ever built on deception and entitlement. He ranted about how this would ruin relationships, how it would embarrass him at work, how Carol now had nothing to show for her investment. At no point did he mention the fact that he let his own mother believe he was a homeowner while living a fantasy funded by someone else. Melissa's dad, quiet as ever, just sat through it. She said he looked more disappointed than angry, like he'd known something was off but never had the spine to dig. He muttered something about wishing things had been handled more carefully. Tyler, on the other hand, laughed. Full-on laughed in the middle of the mess, called it better than reality TV, and asked if they could sell the story to Netflix. I didn't know whether to hate him or toast him. At least someone in that family could see the absurdity. Later, Melissa came to me again, softer this time. Not crying, not defensive, just asking. She wanted to know if there was still something left between us. If we could fix it. If there was any part of me that still saw a future with her. I told her yes, with conditions. Serious ones. We would go through counseling, intensive and honest. And her family would have to acknowledge what happened. Not pretend. Not brush it under the rug, like a bad holiday memory. Acknowledge it. Own it. That was the only way I could even begin to consider rebuilding trust. She agreed. No hesitation. And for the first time, I believe she meant it. A week later, Carol asked to meet for coffee. I said yes. Not because I needed the apology, I didn't, but because I needed to see if she was capable of understanding what she had done. She showed up with that same tight smile she always wore, like she was bracing for a polite negotiation. I didn't let her ease into it. I told her plainly, she played favorites. She built an identity around Eric being the golden child, no matter the cost to everyone else. She enabled fraud. She watched me pay for everything, knowing full well I wasn't being acknowledged, and still spoke to me like I was a burden. She stood in the middle of my house and told me to leave, never once questioning whether what she believed was real. She tried to say she didn't know. I told her that was the problem. She said she was sorry. I nodded, but I didn't offer comfort. I didn't make her feel better, because this wasn't about soothing guilt. This was about drawing a line. I told her the only way forward was respect. Real respect. Not the polite mask she wore, not the passive-aggressive digs, not the forced smiles. Transparency. No more games. No more pretending. If she wanted a relationship with me, hell, with her own daughter, she would have to live in truth from now on. She didn't argue. She just sat there, quiet for once. And I left her with that. Not a threat. A boundary. One that should have been drawn years ago. The house sold in under a month. Westfield Hills had always been desirable, and once it hit the market with that clean staging and updated finishes, offers came pouring in. I accepted one for $1.5 million. After closing costs, taxes, and fees, I walked away with just over $420,000 in profit. It wasn't just money. It felt like compensation for the years I spent invisible in my own home. Every cent was a reminder that I wasn't crazy, I wasn't weak, and I sure as hell wasn't going to keep pretending for the sake of other people's comfort. With the weight of that house off my back, I turned my focus to my firm. I expanded faster than I planned, opened a small office downtown, hired 2 junior analysts who brought fresh eyes and steady energy. Business picked up. New contracts, better clients, stronger revenue. People respected me because I ran my business the same way I'd started running my life. No more pretending, no more apologies for existing on my own terms. Melissa and I did the hard work. We went through counseling that peeled back years of learned behavior, buried loyalty, and the rot of denial. It wasn't smooth. There were sessions that ended with her in tears and me questioning everything. But she showed up, week after week. She listened, she owned her part, and slowly, the silence between us began to shift into something real. We decided to start fresh. Bought a new place together. Clean lines, open space, no ghosts in the walls. This time, both our names were on the deed. That mattered. It wasn't about control, it was about transparency. Equal footing. A mutual understanding that this home wouldn't be built on lies or inheritance fantasies. This time we both belonged. Eric eventually sent a letter. Typed and signed, mailed in a plain envelope like he couldn't even stomach putting his name on it. It was full of half-baked admissions and weak phrases like, I didn't realize how things looked, and maybe I got caught up in things. It wasn't an apology, it was damage control. I read it once, tossed it in a drawer, and never responded. Tyler, surprisingly, became the only one who actually seemed to evolve. He started showing up, actually showing up. Grabbed coffee with me a few times. No masks, no sugarcoating. He made fun of his brother's melodrama, called out his mom's delusion, and admitted outright that the family dynamic had been a mess for years. He didn't try to fix it. He just named it. And weirdly, that made him the only one who finally felt honest. The truth is, counseling helped Melissa more than it helped me. She started to really see it, how much of her life had been shaped around managing her mother's expectations, making space for Eric, and keeping the peace at her own expense. She stopped shrinking. She stopped apologizing for wanting her own life. She finally understood that silence isn't neutrality, it's permission. And for years, she'd given permission for me to be minimized. As for me, I learned the hardest, most valuable truth of all. You teach people how to treat you. Every time I let them talk down to me, every time I said nothing while they praised Eric with my money under their feet, I was teaching them I was okay with it. I wasn't. I just didn't know how to say it out loud back then. Now I do. And for the first time in years, I feel like I'm actually living. Not performing, not enduring, just living. On my terms. No more pretending.